Anita K, Qualified Financial Advisor for 21st Century Education. I've been with 21st Century now for a number of years, and over that time have obviously worked with a lot of students and get quite a lot of phone calls and emails from those students just asking for regular updates on what I'm doing. For those who don't know my story, I started out with a fair bit of debt quite a number of years ago, and now actively invest quite heavily in quite a number of strategies. So a lot of the students like to keep in touch with me just to find out about what I'm doing and what results I'm getting. So I just thought I'd do a quick 10-minute video update just for those students. For those who don't know who I am or my story, I basically started my journey sort of early 20s. I'm 30 now and travelled Europe in my early 20s and acquired quite a lot of travelling debt. So when I returned to Australia, I had 3 credit cards and about $30,000 worth of debt. And I realised very quickly that there was only a certain number of hours that I could work. So I had a full-time job during the week and a weekend job. And I basically wanted to pay down that debt and started looking for additional ways to generate an income stream. I looked at traditional business, I looked at network marketing, I looked at online businesses, all sorts of things. And eventually I came across quite a few strategies at 21st Century Education and eventually enrolled into their home study educational program, which is really where all my base education came from. The home study, for those who don't know what it is really an A to Z of investment. For me, I didn't have a lot of money obviously when I started. I still had that debt when I took on board that education. And so while the home study covered quite a number of strategies that I'd never heard of, like writing covered calls and land options, property options, I focused on the things in the home study that I knew I could implement. And that's what's so great about it. There are so many different strategies and ideas that it doesn't matter if you are a property investor and need cash flow, or you maybe don't have any money but you perhaps want to use strategies through super. I identified very quickly that one of the things I could implement was tax. And so that was really the first thing that I focused on. And I used to work in a traditional job in HR and probably used to have an income of around $65,000 between the 2 jobs. And I probably used to pay an average of maybe $10,000 to $15,000 in tax each year. After implementing those strategies from 21st Century, I reduced my tax quite significantly. The first year I used to receive about $2,000 back every tax year. And the first year after implementing the education, I actually received $10,000 back instead of 2, and realised that very quickly that tax was a very effective strategy, particularly for my circumstances, because I didn't have any money to invest in property or to invest in the stock market, but I could focus on retaining what I had. And so that's what I did. And that $10,000 actually went to paying off a big chunk of that $30,000 debt that I had. From that point on, my taxes reduced quite significantly over time to the point where now it's at nil. I received a letter from the tax office a few months ago basically stating that until they notify me further that I don't need to pay any more tax. So I've effectively reduced my tax bill down to zero through learning about different structures and tax deductions and so forth. But over that time, my income has actually increased quite significantly. So my next goal was to purchase a property, which I did in Melbourne. And I realised very quickly that if I wanted to acquire more property, I would need a cash flow strategy. And that's actually when I started writing covered calls, and I enrolled into an educational course by the name of ShareLord. I traded with ShareLord for about a year. And did very well, and then decided to go across to America to evaluate US property when that opportunity came up. And while I was over there, I purchased a property in Phoenix, which was the first area that 21st Century evaluated. And to date, that has probably been the best investment that I've ever made. I purchased my property, and over that time, probably the last year and a half, I've received positive cash flow from day one, amounting to the value of probably $10,000 to $15,000 over that period. And the property has probably had equally the same amount of capital growth. So to date, that has probably been the best investment that I've made. In the US, I met a gentleman named John Thompson, who was also over there evaluating US property, and he told me a little bit about his selling put option strategy that he'd been using for a number of years. And when I returned from America after purchasing the property, I spent some time with John, and he taught me a little bit about what he was doing. And now I basically combine the selling put option strategy with the covered call strategy that I learnt from ShareLord. And those strategies are now the core educational strategies that I actually use to generate an income outside 21st Century. So just an update in terms of what I'm focusing on now. This year I've revisited property. I'm quite comfortable with where my trading's at now. I've spent a couple of years learning that skill and learning what to do, and I'm very comfortable with where that's at. When I first started, I was probably only receiving maybe 3% a month, but now, quite frequently I get between 5 to 10, which I'm very, very happy with. And the first year trading with ShareLord, I obviously followed a lot of their recommendations and required some support, but the last year and a half I've been trading entirely independently, so I don't follow any recommendations anymore. I just take all of my own trades, and of that 18 months, every month has been a profitable month for me, bar one. So I'm very comfortable with where my trading's at, and for that reason this year I've chosen to revisit property. And earlier this year I signed 2 contracts with Property Direct for 2 properties in Melbourne, and I've also signed another contract for a property in the US. So moving forward, I'll continue to focus on my trading, but in the short term I'm probably going to focus on US property, mainly because that strategy really is a time-sensitive strategy. We really don't know how long that opportunity is going to be around. Most of the properties at the moment are probably around 50,000 and return about 15% net. So for me that's a very wise investment, because obviously my Melbourne properties are all negatively geared. So I hope that's been beneficial to all the members and students. I'm not a millionaire yet, but the reason I wanted to do this update was because I want students to recognise that the results that I've had have been very realistic. I haven't gone from $30,000 in debt to being a millionaire in 2 months. I'm certainly not a millionaire yet, but I'm certainly in a much better position, sort of 3.5 years on, to where I was a few years ago. Now I obviously have income coming in from trading, my US property, I've got my Australian property, and certainly am much more comfortable. Now obviously I work for 21st Century as a qualified financial advisor. I think the reason students want to keep in contact with me is that they know that I'm actively using the strategies in education myself. So they like to keep updated, I think, with the results that I'm getting, and I have completed about 90% of the education here at 21st Century. So while I tend to stick to those core strategies now, I certainly have evaluated 90% of the education here. So I can give a really good insight into the strengths of different strategies and courses. I personally tend to focus on the writing of put and call options, predominantly because they're very low time based. I probably only spend about an hour a month doing that strategy. So for those who have any additional questions, you're more than welcome to contact me through 21st Century or on my direct line, which is 03 8640 1616. I hope you enjoyed the update. Take care.